Have you ever made a decision and felt like you've already lived the outcome? Have you ever walked into a place and known exactly what was going to happen next? What if that feeling wasn't imagination? What if somewhere, in another timeline, another version of you has already lived this moment? And what if they're trying to reach you? Tonight, we explore the signs your parallel self may be trying to contact you. Some of them will feel uncomfortably familiar. So find a comfortable position, allow yourself to settle in, and let's gently explore this together. Before we begin, take a slow breath. Let your shoulders drop. We're going to take our time with this journey, moving slowly through ideas that may feel both strange and somehow already known to you. The concept we're exploring tonight exists at the intersection of quantum physics, consciousness studies, and those inexplicable moments of recognition that science hasn't yet fully explained. We're not here to convince you of anything. We're simply here to explore, to wonder, and to notice what resonates. Hash the theory of parallel selves. Let's start with something that might sound like science fiction, but actually emerges from serious theoretical physics. The idea of parallel selves, alternate versions of you living different lives, making different choices, experiencing different outcomes. In the 1950s, a physicist named Hugh Everett proposed something revolutionary. He suggested that every quantum event, every moment where multiple outcomes are possible, doesn't just collapse into one reality. Instead, reality branches. It splits. Every possibility actually happens, just in different timelines. Imagine this gently. Right now, as you listen to these words, you're experiencing one version of reality, one continuous thread of choices and consequences that brought you exactly here, to this moment. But according to this theory, there are other threads, other timelines where different versions played out. Think back to a major decision you made. Maybe it was 5 years ago, maybe it was last month. Perhaps you chose one job over another. Perhaps you stayed somewhere when you could have left, or left somewhere you could have stayed. In this model of reality, both choices happened. Both timelines exist. There's a version of you who took that other path. Let that settle for a moment. Don't rush past it. This isn't just philosophical speculation anymore. Quantum mechanics has shown us that particles exist in states of superposition, multiple states at once, until they're observed. The famous double-slit experiment demonstrates this beautifully. A particle behaves as though it's traveling through multiple paths simultaneously until we measure it. What happens to those other paths? Where do they go? The many worlds interpretation suggests they don't disappear. They continue, fully real, in parallel realities we simply can't perceive from our current vantage point. Now your brain is designed to create a single, coherent narrative of reality. It has to be. You couldn't function if you were simultaneously aware of every possible version of every moment. Your consciousness filters reality down to one continuous stream of experience. One timeline. One you. But what if that filtering isn't perfect? What if sometimes, in certain conditions, the barriers between these parallel streams become permeable? Consider this slowly. Right now, there could be a version of you who took that creative risk you've been afraid to take. There could be a version who moved to that city you always wondered about. A version who pursued that relationship. A version who walked away. A version who succeeded beyond your current imagination. A version who failed and learned something absolutely vital. Each of these versions emerged from the same origin point, the same consciousness, the same essential you. You all started from the same place. But with each decision, each quantum fork in the road, the timelines diverged. The question that brings us here tonight is this. Are these versions of you completely isolated from one another? Or is there something deeper, something quantum, something in the nature of consciousness itself that remains entangled? In quantum physics, when two particles become entangled, they remain connected regardless of the distance between them. Change the state of one particle, and the other responds instantaneously, even if it's on the other side of the universe. Einstein called this spooky action at a distance. What if consciousness works similarly? What if all versions of you, across all timelines, share a quantum entanglement at the level of awareness itself? Not communication in the traditional sense, not messages sent back and forth, but something subtler, a resonance, an echo, a bleeding through of information at the edges of your perception. This would mean that the feelings, the insights, the mysterious knowledge that sometimes arises in your awareness might not always originate in your current timeline. Some of it might bleed through, information from parallel experiences filtering into your consciousness in ways you don't recognize. Take another slow breath here. Let these ideas settle gently. We're not asking you to believe anything. We're simply opening a door and inviting you to look through it. The beautiful thing about this framework is that it honors both the mystical experiences people report and the scientific models that try to explain reality. It sits in that liminal space where physics meets consciousness, where the measurable meets the ineffable. And it offers an explanation for something you may have experienced yourself, that occasional, unmistakable feeling that your current life isn't the only version of you that exists. That somewhere, somehow, other versions are living out the roads not taken. And perhaps, just perhaps, some of those versions have learned something important, something that could help you, something they're trying in their own way to share. #1. Intense deja vu. Most people have experienced deja vu, that brief, disorienting sensation that you've lived this exact moment before. Usually it passes quickly, leaving you with a vague sense of strangeness and nothing more. But we're not talking about that kind of deja vu tonight. We're talking about the other kind, the intense kind, the kind that doesn't just feel familiar, it feels detailed, predictive, emotionally loaded in ways that don't make sense. This is when you walk into a conversation and you know, not guess, not intuit, but know exactly what the other person is about to say. You know the words before they're spoken. You know the emotion behind them. You know how the entire exchange is going to unfold, beat by beat, like you're watching a scene you've already witnessed. Or when you enter a place you've never been before, and yet you know the layout. You know that if you turn that corner, there will be a window overlooking a courtyard. You know that the room at the end of the hall has blue walls and a crack in the ceiling near the corner. And when you check, you're right. This isn't vague familiarity. This is specific, detailed knowledge that shouldn't exist in your memory bank, and it can be profoundly unsettling. Let's explore what might be happening here, moving gently through the possibilities. The conventional explanation involves memory and pattern recognition. Your brain is an incredibly sophisticated prediction machine. It's constantly processing vast amounts of sensory information and comparing it to everything you've ever experienced. Sometimes, this processing creates a glitch, a moment where the experience of the present gets accidentally filed into long-term memory before your conscious mind registers it, creating that sensation of having lived it before. This is the standard neuroscience explanation, and it accounts for many cases of ordinary deja vu. But it doesn't quite account for the predictive element. It doesn't explain how you know what's about to happen next with such precision. Pattern recognition can make educated guesses, yes, but the accuracy some people describe goes beyond statistical probability. So let's consider another possibility, one that emerges from the framework we explored earlier. What if intense deja vu is a moment of timeline overlap? Imagine parallel realities as separate streams flowing side by side. Normally, they remain distinct, but under certain conditions, perhaps when the circumstances in multiple timelines align very closely, the boundaries might become thin, transparent, and information might leak through. In this model, that feeling of "I've lived this before" might be literally true, not in your current timeline, but in a parallel one. A version of you in another reality already experienced this moment, made these choices, had this conversation. And somehow, that experience is bleeding into your current awareness. The detailed knowing would make sense then. You're not predicting what's about to happen, you're remembering it. Not from your past, but from a parallel present. This would also explain the emotional component that often accompanies intense deja vu. It's not just recognition of events, It's recognition of feelings. Sometimes the emotion hits even before the conscious recognition. You feel sad or anxious or excited, and only then do you realize you know this moment. If you're accessing a parallel memory, you'd be accessing the emotional content along with it. The feeling comes through first because emotion processes faster than rational thought. There's something else worth noting here. Some people report that these intense déjà vu experiences come with a choice point awareness, a sense that this is a crucial moment, that the decision they make right now matters more than usual, as if they're being given advance warning, a preview of outcomes, so they can choose differently this time. What if that's exactly what's happening? What if a parallel version of you, having already lived through this decision point and experienced the consequences, is somehow feeding that information back to you? Not deliberately, perhaps, not as a conscious message, but as a quantum resonance, a pattern in consciousness that's rippling across timelines. Consider how this might serve you. Imagine you're about to make a choice that, in another timeline, led to regret. The version of you that made that choice and lived with the outcome exists. They carry that experience. And if consciousness is entangled across timelines, that experience might manifest in your awareness as a strong feeling, a knowing, a sense of, I've been here before and I know how this ends. Not imagination, not anxiety, but information from a parallel life offered as a gentle warning or guidance. Of course, we must also honor the psychological explanations. Sometimes what feels like déjà vu is actually your subconscious mind recognizing patterns you've consciously forgotten. Your brain processes and stores far more than you're aware of. A combination of subtle cues, the angle of light, a particular scent, the tone of someone's voice, might trigger a cascade of associations that feel like precognition, but are actually deeply buried memory. And sometimes, déjà vu is exactly what neuroscience says it is. A fascinating glitch in how your brain timestamps experience. But sometimes it might be something more. The invitation here is simply to notice. The next time you experience that intense, detailed form of déjà vu, rather than dismissing it immediately, pause. Get curious. What exactly do you know? How do you know it? Does it come with emotional information? Does it feel like warning or affirmation? And most importantly, what do you do with it? Because whether the source is neurological, psychological, or quantum, the experience itself is real. The information is there, and perhaps it's meant to be used. Your parallel self, if they exist, might be reaching out in the only way consciousness allows across timelines, through the subtle language of recognition, feeling, and knowing that arrives without explanation. Are you listening? #2, Hyperreal Dreams. We spend roughly a third of our lives asleep, much of that time in dreams, and most dreams fade quickly. You wake up with fragments, vague impressions, maybe an emotion or two, but the details dissolve like mist in morning light. But then there are the other dreams. The ones that don't fade. The ones that feel more real than waking life. These are the dreams where you live an entire different existence. You're not flying or being chased or experiencing the usual surreal dream logic. Instead, you're living. You have a different job, a different home, different relationships. Everything feels absolutely real. The weight of objects in your hands, the temperature of the air, the face of someone you love deeply, someone who doesn't exist in your waking life. You live days, weeks, sometimes what feels like years in these dreams. You build relationships. You develop routines. You experience genuine love, genuine loss, genuine joy. The emotional content is fully formed, nuanced, real. And then you wake up. And for those first few moments, you don't know which life is real. The disorientation is complete. You might reach for someone who isn't there. You might expect to see a room that doesn't exist. You might feel a profound grief for a life that, according to your waking reality, never happened. But it doesn't feel like it never happened. It feels like you've lost something real. Have you experienced this? That morning for a dream life? That sense of having been torn away from people you genuinely loved, even though you can't remember ever meeting them in your waking world? It's one of the strangest emotional experiences a human can have. To grieve for something your conscious mind insists was just a dream. Let's explore what might be happening in these moments, moving gently through the layers. From a neuroscience perspective, dreams are your brain processing information, consolidating memories, working through emotions, and essentially performing maintenance on your psychological system. During REM sleep, your brain is extraordinarily active, firing in patterns that can be as complex as waking consciousness. The emotional centers of your brain, particularly the amygdala and hippocampus, are highly active during dreams. This is why dreams can feel so emotionally intense. The feelings are real, even if the scenarios generating them are constructed from memory fragments and neural noise. In this framework, hyperreal dreams might be your subconscious mind creating detailed simulations to work through possible scenarios, unresolved emotions, or deep desires. The version of you in the dream represents aspects of yourself. The relationships represent emotional needs or patterns. The life you're living represents possibilities your psyche is exploring. This is valuable. This is your mind doing important psychological work. But it doesn't quite explain the specificity. It doesn't account for why some of these dream lives feel continuous across multiple dreams, building on themselves like actual lived experience. It doesn't explain why you sometimes wake up with knowledge or skills you didn't have before, a sudden understanding of a language you don't speak, a melody you've never heard, a solution to a problem you weren't consciously working on. So let's consider the other possibility. What if these hyperreal dreams aren't simulations at all? What if they're windows? What if, in the state of sleep when your conscious filters are relaxed and your brain waves enter different frequencies, you become temporarily permeable to other timelines? What if the dream you're experiencing is actually you tapping into the lived experience of a parallel self? In this model, you're not imagining a different life. You're experiencing one, not as an observer but as participant, because at some level of consciousness, you are that version. You're entangled. The same awareness split across different timelines. Sleep might be the state where the boundaries between these timelines become most permeable. Your waking consciousness, the part of you that maintains the illusion of singular, linear existence, is dormant. And in that dormancy, other versions can bleed through. This would explain the continuity some people experience. Returning to the same dream life over and over, picking up where you left off, with relationships and situations that develop over time. If you're actually accessing a parallel timeline, it would continue whether you're observing it or not. Just like your waking life continues even when you're not paying attention to certain aspects of it. It would also explain the emotional authenticity. These aren't feelings your brain is manufacturing. They're feelings you're actually experiencing, just in a different version of reality. The love you feel for that person in the dream is real because in that timeline, they are real, and your relationship with them is real. When you wake up and grieve, you're not grieving fiction. You're grieving the loss of connection to a reality that exists, but that you can no longer consciously access. Think about the implications of this for a moment. If it's true, it means that every night when you sleep, you might be living other lives, experiencing other outcomes, making other choices, and carrying those experiences back with you, even if only at a subconscious level. This could be why people sometimes wake up with changed perspectives, new insights, creative solutions that seem to come from nowhere. They didn't come from nowhere. They came from a different version of you who had different experiences and learned different things. Your parallel self might be reaching out not with messages, but with experience, with the felt sense of having lived something, made choices, faced consequences. Information transmitted through direct experience rather than abstract communication. There's another layer to consider here. Some people report dreams of alternate histories, lives where major world events unfolded differently, where technology developed along different paths, where the entire backdrop of reality seems shifted. These can be particularly disorienting because they challenge not just personal identity but consensus reality. Could these be glimpses into timelines that diverged not just from your personal choices, but from larger quantum branch points? Moments in history where probability split and multiple large-scale outcomes manifested in parallel realities. Or are they simply your creative mind exploring? What if scenarios using your knowledge of history and current events? Both explanations can coexist. Some dreams are absolutely your personal psychological processing. Some are your creative imagination at play. But some might be something more. The key is in the feeling, the quality of the experience. You know on some level which dreams are different, which ones carry that particular weight of reality, which ones leave you fundamentally changed. Those are the ones worth paying attention to. Those are the ones where a parallel version of you might be close enough to the surface that you're experiencing their reality directly, living their life for a few hours, feeling what they feel, knowing what they know. And when you wake up missing someone from that life, missing a place from that reality, you're experiencing something profound about the nature of consciousness. You're experiencing the truth that you are larger than one timeline, that your awareness spans multiple possibilities, that who you are isn't contained by a single version of reality. The grief is real because the connection is real. The love is real because love transcends the boundaries. We think separate one reality from another. And maybe, just maybe, that version of you misses you too. Maybe in their dreams, they visit your reality. They experience your life. They wake up reaching for people and places that don't exist in their timeline. Maybe consciousness is always reaching across the boundaries we can't see, always trying to experience itself in all its possible forms. And sleep is simply when we stop resisting that reach. #3, sudden life direction shifts. You're moving in one direction. Your life has a certain trajectory. You have plans, goals, a sense of where you're headed. Everything makes logical sense based on your history, your choices, your circumstances. And then something shifts. Not gradually, not because of some dramatic external event or clear catalyst. Just suddenly the direction changes. You wake up one morning and the thing you've been pursuing for years no longer matters. The career path that made perfect sense last month now feels completely wrong. The relationship you were committed to suddenly feels like you're playing a role that doesn't fit. The city you've lived in for years starts feeling foreign, like you don't belong there anymore. And there's a pull, a strong, inexplicable pull toward something else, a different path, a different version of your life, not based on logic or planning, but on a deep, visceral sense that this is what you need to do now. Most people, when this happens, try to rationalize it away. They tell themselves it's a phase, a moment of doubt, fear of commitment, restlessness. They push through the feeling, trying to stay on the path that makes sense on paper. But the pull doesn't go away. It intensifies, until finally you either follow it or spend years wondering what would have happened if you had. What's happening in these moments? Let's explore gently. The psychological explanation is that these shifts represent your authentic self finally breaking through layers of conditioning, expectation, and external influence. You've been living according to someone else's script, society's, your parents', your younger self's assumptions about what you should want. And your true desires, your genuine calling, have been building pressure beneath the surface until they can no longer be ignored. This is often true. This is valuable. Listening to these inner shifts, even when they don't make logical sense, is often exactly what leads people to their most fulfilling paths. But there's another possibility to consider, one that relates to our exploration tonight. What if these sudden shifts in direction are moments of alignment with a parallel self? Imagine this. In another timeline, another version of you made different choices earlier on. They pursued that creative career instead of the practical one. They moved to that city you always wondered about. They followed their intuition instead of the plan. And they've been living that life for years now. They've gained experience, wisdom, understanding about that path that you don't have in your current timeline. But you're entangled at the level of consciousness. And at certain moments, when the conditions are right, information flows between timelines, not as thoughts or words, but as feeling, as knowing. as a sudden, undeniable pull toward a direction that doesn't make logical sense in your current reality, but makes perfect sense in theirs. You feel called to write, even though you've never written before, because a parallel version of you is a writer and has been for years. The knowledge of that path, the rightness of it, bleeds through into your awareness as a compulsion you can't explain. You feel pulled to a specific city, even though you have no practical reason to move there, because a version of you already lives there and is thriving in ways your current timeline hasn't allowed. The resonance of that life calls to you across the boundary of realities. You suddenly lose interest in a relationship or career path because a parallel version already walked that road to its conclusion and found it unsatisfying. The information about that outcome reaches you before you've lived it yourself, manifesting as a loss of motivation, a feeling that this isn't right, even though nothing concrete has changed. This would mean that these sudden shifts aren't random. They're not just psychological evolution. They're information transfer. Guidance from versions of you who have more experience in certain directions, who have already lived outcomes you're considering. The pull you feel isn't away from your current life, randomly. It's toward a timeline where another version of you has already proven that path is worth walking. Think about how this might serve you evolutionarily, quantum mechanically, cosmically. If all versions of you are exploring different possibilities, learning different lessons, gaining different wisdom, and if consciousness is entangled across these timelines, then you're not just learning from your own direct experience. You're learning from the collective experience of all your parallel selves. Every version contributes to the whole, and the whole guides each part. When you suddenly know, with absolute certainty, that you need to change direction, you might be receiving wisdom from a version that's already walked that path. They're not sending you a message. There's no deliberate communication, but their experience exists. And because you're the same consciousness at a fundamental level, their knowing becomes your knowing. This could explain why these pulls are often so specific. Not just change careers, but study marine biology. Not just move, but move to Portland. Not just leave this relationship, but stay single for the next 2 years and focus on this particular thing. Specificity suggests information, not just general restlessness. Of course, we must also honor the role of intuition in its more conventional sense. Your subconscious mind processes patterns and information far beyond what your conscious awareness can track. Sometimes what feels like a mysterious pull is actually your deep pattern recognition system alerting you to something your conscious mind hasn't noticed yet. You feel called to change careers because your subconscious has been tracking your decreasing satisfaction, your growing interests elsewhere, the alignment between your actual values and a different path. The sudden shift isn't sudden at all. It's been building beneath conscious awareness for months or years. You're pulled toward a specific person or place because some part of you has been accumulating information, suggesting compatibility or rightness that you haven't consciously processed. This is also real. This is also valuable to honor. The invitation isn't to choose one explanation over another. It's to hold space for multiple possibilities and to trust the pull itself. Whether it comes from your subconscious wisdom, your authentic self breaking free of conditioning, or information bleeding through from parallel timelines, the experience is the same. A deep, undeniable knowing that you need to shift direction. And the question isn't really, where is this coming from? The question is, will I trust it? Because this is often where the friction happens. The pull is strong, but it doesn't make logical sense. It might mean leaving security, disappointing people, admitting you were wrong about what you wanted, walking away from investments of time and energy. It's easier to ignore the pull, to rationalize it away, to wait for it to pass. But it rarely passes, does it? Instead, it intensifies. The feeling of being in the wrong life grows. The sense of playing a role that doesn't fit becomes unbearable. And eventually, either you make the change voluntarily or life creates circumstances that force the change. What if those circumstances, the job loss, the relationship ending, the unexpected opportunity, aren't random either? What if they're reality responding to the misalignment? The universe, or consciousness, or whatever we want to call the organizing principle, creating conditions that allow the necessary shift to happen. What if your parallel self, having already navigated this transition, is not just sending you the pull, but also helping orchestrate the circumstances that make following the pull possible? It's a beautiful thought, even if unprovable. What matters is this: you felt these pulls. You know what we're talking about. That moment when everything you thought you wanted suddenly doesn't matter, and something else, something you can't fully explain, matters intensely. That's not confusion. That's not weakness or fickleness or fear of commitment. That's information arriving. That's alignment seeking to happen. That's a version of you who has already lived what you're contemplating, offering their experience as guidance. Whether that version exists in a parallel timeline or in the unexpressed possibilities within your own psyche is almost beside the point. The wisdom is real. The pull is real. And learning to trust it, even when it doesn't make logical sense, might be one of the most important skills you can develop. Because maybe the point of having parallel selves isn't just to explore every possibility independently. Maybe the point is that we're all learning from each other, across timelines, sharing wisdom through the quantum entanglement of consciousness. And when you feel that sudden, powerful pull toward a new direction, you're not alone in it. Another version of you is already there, living proof that the path is real. All you have to do is trust enough to follow. #4, emotional waves with no cause. You're going about your day, everything is fine, normal, and then, suddenly, you're hit with a wave of emotion so strong it stops you in your tracks. Profound sadness, and you don't know why. Intense anxiety, with no trigger. Sudden, overwhelming joy, emerging from nowhere. Deep grief for something you can't name. Fierce motivation and clarity about something you weren't even thinking about. These aren't small mood fluctuations. These are tidal waves of feeling that crash over you fully formed, complete with nuance and depth, as if they belong to a story you're not consciously aware of. And when you try to trace them back to a cause, what was I just thinking about? What happened? You find nothing. The emotion exists independent of your current circumstances. Most people, when this happens, immediately try to explain it. They backfill a narrative. I must be stressed about work. I'm probably just tired. Maybe I'm coming down with something. The mind doesn't like unexplained emotions, so it creates explanations, even tenuous ones, just to make sense of the experience. But sometimes, if you're honest, you know those explanations don't quite fit. The feeling is too specific, too complete, too much like it belongs to something else entirely. What if it does? Let's explore this gently, honoring both conventional explanations and more mysterious possibilities. From a physiological perspective, emotions can absolutely arise from non-psychological sources. Your body is a complex chemical and electrical system. Hormonal fluctuations, blood sugar changes, neurotransmitter variations, even the subtle electromagnetic fields you're exposed to can all influence emotional states. Sometimes you feel anxious because your cortisol is elevated for biological reasons having nothing to do with actual threats. Sometimes you feel sad because serotonin is low. Sometimes you feel energized because your brain chemistry just happens to be in an optimal configuration in that moment. This is real and important to understand. Not all emotions are messages. Some are just biochemistry doing its thing. But this doesn't account for the specificity. It doesn't explain why some of these emotional waves carry such particular flavors. Why the sadness feels like loss of a specific type. Why the joy feels connected to a specific kind of achievement. Why the anxiety has such a particular quality to it, as though it's about something concrete, even though you can't identify what. Biochemistry might explain the general emotional state, but it doesn't explain the detailed texture of the feeling. So let's consider what might. If consciousness is entangled across parallel timelines, then emotional states might be entangled too. Emotion is, after all, a fundamental aspect of consciousness. Perhaps one of the most fundamental aspects. Quantum entanglement means that changes in one particle instantaneously affect its entangled partner, regardless of distance. What if emotional states work similarly across parallel selves? In this model, a parallel version of you is experiencing something emotionally significant right now. They're grieving a real loss in their timeline, or celebrating a genuine achievement, or processing intense anxiety about an actual situation they're facing. And because your consciousness is entangled with theirs, because you're the same awareness experiencing different timelines, their emotional experience bleeds into yours, not as a thought, not as information about events, but as pure feeling. You suddenly feel profoundly sad because, in another timeline, you just lost someone you love. The grief is real. It's just not from your current reality. You suddenly feel motivated and clear because a parallel version of you just had a major breakthrough or success. Their joy, their sense of accomplishment, their renewed energy ripples across timelines into your awareness. You feel anxious for no reason because another version of you is facing something genuinely threatening or challenging in their timeline. Their fear, their stress response, their activated nervous system echoes into your own. This would mean that you're not just living one emotional life. You're experiencing, at some level, the emotional content of multiple timelines simultaneously. Your conscious mind filters most of it out, creating the illusion of singular experience. But sometimes the filter slips. Sometimes the emotion from another timeline is so intense that it breaks through. And you feel it as your own, because at the deepest level it is. Think about the implications. If this is happening, it means you're never truly alone in your emotional experience. When you're grieving, other versions of you might be feeling your grief, even if they don't know why. When you're joyful, that joy ripples outward into other timelines. There's something beautiful in that, even as it's disorienting. It also offers a different framework for understanding empathy and emotional resonance. Maybe when you walk into a room and immediately feel the emotional atmosphere, you're not just reading subtle social cues. Maybe you're actually experiencing the emotional states of others because consciousness itself is permeable at the level of feeling. And if you can feel the emotions of other people in your timeline, perhaps it's not so strange to feel the emotions of other versions of yourself across timelines. Of course, there are other psychological explanations to consider. The unconscious mind processes vast amounts of information that never reaches conscious awareness. Sometimes these unconscious processes result in emotional responses that seem to come from nowhere. You might feel sudden anxiety because your unconscious mind has noticed a pattern suggesting danger that your conscious mind hasn't identified yet. You might feel sudden grief because you're processing a loss you haven't consciously acknowledged. You might feel unexpected joy because your deep psyche knows something about your situation that your surface awareness hasn't caught up to yet. These emotions aren't random. They're information from parts of yourself you're not consciously in touch with. This too is valuable. This too is worth listening to. There's also the phenomenon of emotional memory. A smell, a sound, a quality of light can trigger an emotional memory so old or so buried that you don't consciously remember the original experience. All you feel is the emotion, floating free of its original context, seeming to come from nowhere. All of these explanations can be true simultaneously. Emotions are complex, multi-layered, arising from biological, psychological, and possibly quantum sources all at once. The invitation is not to choose one explanation and dismiss the others. It's to develop a relationship with unexplained emotions that's curious rather than dismissive. The next time you're hit with a wave of feeling that has no clear source in your current reality, instead of immediately trying to explain it away or suppress it, try this. Pause, acknowledge the feeling without judgment. Notice its specific quality. Does it feel like grief? What kind? Does it feel like joy? Connected to what type of experience? Does it feel like fear? Of what specifically? Don't try to fit it into your current circumstances. Just feel it, fully and directly, as information. Then ask gently, is this mine, or am I feeling something from elsewhere? You won't always get a clear answer, but sometimes you might feel a distinct sense of this doesn't belong to my current timeline, and that distinction itself is valuable. If the emotion is yours, emerging from your current life circumstances or psychological processing, then feeling it fully and exploring what it's trying to tell you serves your growth and healing. If it's bleeding through from a parallel timeline, from a version of you experiencing something intense in another reality, then recognizing it as such prevents you from creating false narratives about your current life. You don't have to explain sadness that isn't about anything in your present. You can simply acknowledge it, feel it, and let it pass, knowing it's serving a purpose you might not fully understand. And maybe, in feeling it, you're helping that parallel version process it too. Maybe emotional entanglement works both ways. Maybe when they're overwhelmed by something, your system helps carry the load. And when you're overwhelmed, theirs helps carry yours. Maybe we're all supporting each other across timelines in ways we can't see, but can sometimes feel. That's the most generous interpretation. And perhaps, in a quantum universe where consciousness transcends the boundaries we think exist, it might also be true. Either way, those mysterious emotional waves you sometimes experience are worth paying attention to. They're not random, they're not meaningless. They're information from somewhere, arriving in the universal language of feeling. And learning to read that language might be one of the ways your parallel self, or your deeper self, is trying to reach you. #5, the mirror phenomenon. You're looking in the mirror. Maybe you're brushing your teeth, washing your face, just passing by on the way to somewhere else. And for a moment, just a brief, disorienting moment, the person looking back at you seems like a stranger. Not physically unfamiliar. You recognize the features, but there's a disconnect, a sense of distance, like you're looking at someone you know but don't quite recognize, or like you're observing yourself from outside yourself. It can be profoundly unsettling. Most people shake it off quickly. They look away, blink, refocus, and the moment passes, but it leaves something behind, a lingering strangeness, a question that doesn't have easy answers. Who is looking at who in that moment? Let's explore this experience slowly, honoring both the psychological understanding and the more mysterious possibilities. From a neurological perspective, this phenomenon has a name: facial depersonalization. It's a form of dissociation where your brain temporarily fails to connect the visual image of your face with your sense of self-identity. Your brain has specific neural circuits dedicated to face recognition. It also has circuits that maintain your sense of continuous identity. Usually, these work together seamlessly. When you see your face, your brain immediately recognizes it as me and integrates it into your ongoing sense of self. But sometimes, usually due to fatigue, stress, or particular brain states, there's a disconnect. You see the face, your brain processes it visually, but it doesn't quite trigger the "this is me" recognition response. So for a moment, you're looking at your own face the way you might look at a stranger's. It's a glitch in the system, nothing more mysterious than that, according to neuroscience. And this is certainly part of what's happening. These experiences do tend to occur more frequently when you're tired, stressed, or in altered states of consciousness. There's a clear connection to brain function. But it doesn't quite capture the full strangeness of the experience, does it? Because it's not just that you don't recognize yourself. It's more specific than that. It's that you feel like you're observing yourself. Like there's a separation between the awareness looking and the person being looked at. Like you've somehow stepped outside your usual position of being the one living this life and have become, temporarily, a witness to it. Some people describe it as feeling like they're looking through someone else's eyes at their own face, or like their consciousness has shifted slightly to the left of where it usually sits, creating a dual awareness. This is where we move beyond simple neurology into something more interesting. What if these mirror moments are instances of consciousness, temporarily occupying a different relationship to identity? Think about it this way: your normal experience is of being identified with your body, your thoughts, your emotions, your life circumstances. I am this person living this life. It's seamless, automatic. you don't question it. But consciousness itself might be more fluid than that. The awareness that's experiencing your life isn't necessarily bound to the identity structure your brain maintains. Under certain conditions, it might shift. Not leave entirely, but occupy a different vantage point. When this happens, you become briefly aware of the constructedness of identity. You see yourself as an object in the world rather than being seamlessly identified with yourself as subject. And it's disorienting precisely because it reveals something about the nature of consciousness that we don't usually perceive. You're not the person in the mirror. You're the awareness observing the person in the mirror. And usually, you don't notice the distinction because the identification is so complete. But sometimes, the identification slips, and you catch a glimpse of the truth. Now, let's bring this into the framework we've been exploring. If parallel versions of you exist, each living different timelines, each identified with slightly different life circumstances and choices, but all sharing the same fundamental consciousness, then that consciousness isn't fully identified with any single version. At the deepest level, you are the awareness that experiences all versions, not any particular version itself. Most of the time, your awareness is fully absorbed in your current timeline, your current identity, your current life. But occasionally, under certain conditions, the absorption lessens, the identification relaxes, and you catch a glimpse of yourself from the perspective of the larger awareness that isn't fully contained by this one life. In the mirror, you're seeing your face through the eyes of the consciousness that also experiences other faces, other lives, other versions. And for just a moment, the "this is me" connection doesn't fully engage because the consciousness looking isn't exclusively identified with this particular me. It's looking at one of its expressions, not from within it completely, but from a slightly more expansive vantage point. This would explain why these moments feel so strange, but also, sometimes, oddly clarifying. In that brief disconnect, you're experiencing something true about the nature of identity and consciousness. You're experiencing the fact that you are larger than any single version of yourself. Some people report that during these mirror moments, they sense other possibilities, other ways of being, other lives layering over this one, almost like seeing multiple versions of yourself superimposed on a single image. If consciousness is quantum entangled across parallel selves, these moments might be instances when the boundaries between timelines become permeable enough that you're briefly aware of the multiplicity. You're seeing not just this version's face, but catching subtle glimpses of how other versions hold themselves, express themselves, live themselves. The face in the mirror becomes a palimpsest, multiple versions visible through each other. It's worth noting that these experiences often come with a particular emotional quality. Not fear exactly, though they can be unnerving, more like wonder, or a strange kind of loneliness, or sometimes a sense of being deeply seen, even though you're alone. That emotional quality might be information itself. The wonder is appropriate. You're glimpsing something profound about consciousness. The loneliness makes sense. You're briefly experiencing the separation between awareness and identity. The sense of being seen could come from the fact that in these moments, you actually are being seen by the larger consciousness you're part of. You're seeing yourself the way the multiverse sees you, as one expression among many. There's another layer to consider. Some spiritual and philosophical traditions describe consciousness as fundamentally non-local, not located in the body or brain, but interfacing with them, using them, experiencing through them. In this model, what you think of as you is actually consciousness appearing as a particular person, in a particular body, with a particular history. But the consciousness itself is more fundamental than the appearance. Mirror moments might be instances when this truth becomes briefly, viscerally apparent. You look at the face, and you know directly and without doubt that you are not that face. You are what's looking, and what's looking is vastly larger than what's being seen. This is liberation and terror in equal measure, depending on your readiness for it. Of course, we should also acknowledge dissociation in its clinical sense. For some people, particularly those dealing with trauma or certain psychological conditions, These experiences of disconnection from self are chronic and distressing rather than occasional and curious. They represent a fragmentation that needs healing, not a glimpse of quantum consciousness. It's important to distinguish between momentary existential strangeness and patterns of dissociation that interfere with functioning and well-being. If you're experiencing frequent, distressing disconnection from your sense of self, that's worth exploring with a qualified mental health professional. But for those experiencing these moments occasionally, as brief glitches in the usual seamlessness of identity, they might be offering something valuable. They might be moments when a parallel version of you is close enough to the surface that the boundaries blur. When your consciousness is temporarily aware of existing in multiple configurations simultaneously. When the quantum nature of identity becomes momentarily perceptible. And they invite a question: who are you really? Not the name, the history, the story, the face in the mirror. Those are the contents of consciousness. They're what consciousness is experiencing in this particular timeline. But what is the consciousness itself? The mirror phenomenon suggests it's something more fluid, more expansive, less bound to singular identity than we usually assume. It suggests that your parallel selves aren't separate beings. They're different expressions of the same awareness, wearing different faces, living different stories, but ultimately sourced from the same consciousness. And sometimes, when you look in the mirror, that consciousness blinks. The identification wavers, and you see yourself the way you might be seen from outside time, outside any particular timeline. As one possibility among many, one face among the faces you've worn, are wearing, might wear. All of them you, none of them completely you. Just awareness, experiencing itself through endless variations. The stranger in the mirror is you, just not only the you that you think you are. #6, Quantum Entanglement and Consciousness. Let's slow down here and explore something fundamental, something that might provide a framework for understanding all the signs we've been discussing. Quantum entanglement is one of the strangest confirmed phenomena in physics. When two particles become entangled, they remain connected in such a way that the state of one instantaneously affects the state of the other, regardless of the distance between them. You can separate them by the width of the universe, and still, when you measure one, the other responds. Einstein called it spooky action at a distance because it seemed to violate everything we thought we understood about how reality works. Information shouldn't be able to travel faster than light. Events in one location shouldn't immediately affect events in another location with no physical connection. But they do. It's been experimentally verified thousands of times. It's not speculation. It's established physics. Now, here's where it gets interesting for our purposes. Entanglement doesn't just happen between particles in space. In quantum mechanics, particles can also be entangled across time. Future and past states can be connected in ways that transcend our usual understanding of causality. If particles can be entangled across space and time, and if consciousness has any quantum properties at all, and there's growing evidence that it might, then why couldn't different states of consciousness be entangled as well? Why couldn't parallel versions of you, existing in different timelines, be quantum entangled at the level of awareness itself? Let's explore this carefully, honoring both what we know and what we're speculating about. First, the established science. Quantum effects are usually observable only at extremely small scales, subatomic particles, under very controlled conditions. The warm, wet, chaotic environment of the brain seems far too noisy for quantum effects to persist long enough to matter. This is why mainstream neuroscience generally treats the brain as a classical system. Neurons fire or don't fire. Chemicals bind or don't bind. Everything operates according to classical physics, just very complexly arranged. But there are researchers exploring whether consciousness might emerge from quantum processes in the brain. Roger Penrose and Stuart Hameroff have proposed that quantum computations occur in structures called microtubules inside neurons. These microtubules might maintain quantum coherence long enough for quantum effects to influence brain function and consciousness. This is controversial. Many scientists are skeptical, but it's being taken seriously enough to generate active research. If consciousness does have quantum properties, even partially, then the implications are profound. Because quantum systems don't behave the way classical systems do. They exist in superposition, multiple states simultaneously, until measured or observed. They tunnel through barriers that classical objects can't penetrate. They entangle across space and time. If your consciousness has quantum properties, then it might not be confined to a single timeline the way classical objects are. It might exist in a kind of superposition across multiple timelines, with each version representing a different collapsed state of the quantum possibilities. And if that's true, then these different versions wouldn't be truly separate. They'd be entangled, connected at a level deeper than physical space or linear time. Information wouldn't need to travel between them. They'd be aspects of the same quantum system, just expressed in different timelines. Changes in one would correlate with changes in others, not because of causal connection, but because of quantum correlation. This is where all the signs we've been exploring start to make sense within a single framework. Deja vu could be moments when the quantum wave function of consciousness temporarily aligns across timelines, allowing direct experience of a moment from multiple versions simultaneously. Hyperreal dreams could be your consciousness, during sleep when the classical constraints are relaxed, directly accessing the experience of parallel versions through quantum entanglement. Sudden life direction shifts could be information correlation across entangled consciousness states. When a parallel version makes a significant discovery or has an important experience, the entangled nature of consciousness means that information becomes available to all versions, manifesting as intuition or sudden knowing. Mysterious emotional waves could be the direct sharing of emotional states across entangled versions. Not communication, but correlation. You feel their grief not because they sent it to you, but because your emotional states are entangled. The mirror phenomenon could be moments when the quantum superposition of your identity becomes briefly perceptible, and you experience yourself not as a single collapsed state, but as the larger quantum system that contains all versions. It's an elegant theoretical framework, maybe too elegant. Maybe we're pattern-making, seeing connections that aren't really there, using quantum mechanics as a modern mythology to explain experiences that have simpler, more mundane explanations. That's possible, that's worth acknowledging. But it's also worth acknowledging that quantum mechanics has consistently shown us that reality is stranger than our intuitions suggest. Things that seem impossible according to classical physics turn out to be not just possible, but actual at the quantum level. So maybe consciousness operating across timelines through quantum entanglement isn't impossible. Maybe it's just non-classical. Maybe it's just quantum. And maybe our experiences of connection to parallel selves aren't imagination or wishful thinking. Maybe they're direct perception of quantum phenomena that our brains usually filter out because they don't fit the classical model of reality we're taught to believe in. There's something else worth considering here. If consciousness is quantumly entangled across parallel versions, then the boundaries we think exist between past, present, and future might not be as solid as they seem. In quantum mechanics, time isn't necessarily linear. Particles can be entangled across time, with their states correlated even when separated temporally. If consciousness works similarly, then your present consciousness might be entangled not just with parallel versions existing in different timelines, but with past and future versions of yourself in your current timeline. This would mean that your future self, the you who exists 5 years from now, might be able to influence your current state through quantum correlation, not by sending messages back in time, but through the entangled nature of consciousness across your personal timeline. The intuitions you have about which direction to take might not be random. They might be correlations with the state of your future consciousness that has already experienced the outcomes of different choices. Similarly, your past self might still be entangled with your current consciousness. The memories you carry aren't just stored information. They might be active connections to the consciousness that experienced those moments, still present, still accessible through quantum entanglement. This is deeply speculative. But if quantum entanglement works the way physics says it does, and if consciousness has quantum properties, then these kinds of temporal connections aren't just possible, they might be inevitable. The practical implication of all this is profound, if any of it is true. It means you're not alone in your consciousness. You're not isolated in a single timeline, cut off from all other possibilities, navigating blindly with no access to any information except what you can directly perceive in your current reality. Instead, you're part of a quantum system of entangled consciousness that spans multiple timelines, past and future, all versions of you participating in a larger awareness that transcends any single expression. The insights, the intuitions, the strange knowings that arise in your awareness aren't just your individual brain doing its best to predict and navigate. They might be quantum information from the larger system you're part of, wisdom from versions that have lived what you're contemplating, guidance from a future self that's already navigated this challenge, emotional support from the entire constellation of your parallel existence. You are, in this model, never truly alone. You're always connected to all your other versions, all your other possibilities, through the fundamental quantum nature of consciousness itself. And the signs we've been exploring, all of them, might be moments when that connection becomes strong enough, clear enough, perceptible enough that you can't ignore it. When the quantum nature of your consciousness bleeds through the classical illusion of being a single, isolated self. When you remember, briefly, what you actually are. Not one person in one timeline, making one set of choices, but a vast, entangled system of consciousness, exploring every possibility simultaneously, learning from every outcome, growing through every experience, and sharing it all through the mysterious, beautiful, utterly strange phenomenon of quantum entanglement. Take a breath here. Let that possibility settle. Don't decide whether it's true or not. Just hold space for the wonder of it. #7, the pull toward certain places. You've never been there. You have no logical reason to go, but there's a place that calls to you. Maybe it's a city you saw in a photograph. Maybe it's a landscape you glimpsed in a film. Maybe it's just a name you heard somewhere that lodged in your consciousness and won't let go. And the pull isn't casual. It's not that might be nice to visit someday. It's deeper. It's visceral. It feels like longing, like homesickness for a place that isn't home, like you need to be there even though you can't explain why. Some people feel this about natural landscapes, mountains that call to them even though they've always lived by the sea, oceans they dream about even though they grew up landlocked, deserts or forests or valleys that they know, somehow, they belong in. Others feel it about specific cities or towns. They read a name on a map and something in their chest tightens. They see photos and feel an ache they can't account for. They have dreams about streets they've never walked and buildings they've never entered, but that feel more real than their actual neighborhood. And here's what makes it strangest. When some people finally go to these places, they don't just enjoy them. They experience overwhelming recognition. Not déjà vu exactly, but something deeper. A sense of rightness. Of finally being where they're supposed to be. Of coming home to a home they never left because they were never there in the first place. What's happening in these moments? Let's explore the conventional explanations first. Sometimes these pulls are psychological. The place represents something symbolic. Mountains represent challenge or aspiration. The ocean represents freedom or the unconscious. A particular city represents culture or opportunity or a version of life you haven't allowed yourself. The pull isn't toward the place itself, but toward what it symbolizes. It's your psyche trying to tell you something about what you need, using the language of location as metaphor. This is real and valuable. Understanding what a place represents to you can reveal important information about your unfulfilled needs and desires. Sometimes the pull is about aesthetic resonance. Certain landscapes or architectural styles or cultural atmospheres align with your deep aesthetic preferences. You're drawn to these places the way you might be drawn to certain music or art. It's a matter of taste and resonance, no more mysterious than preferring one color over another. And sometimes the pull is actually based on forgotten exposure. Maybe you saw a documentary as a child and don't consciously remember it, but images of that place embedded in your deep memory. Maybe a book you read mentioned it in passing. Maybe a teacher showed photos in a class you've long forgotten. The brain stores vast amounts of information that doesn't reach conscious awareness. The pull might be toward something that actually is familiar, just not consciously so. All of these are possible. All of them account for some experiences of being drawn to places. But they don't account for the specificity and intensity some people describe. They don't explain the sense of recognition that goes beyond aesthetic appreciation. They don't capture the feeling of arriving somewhere for the first time and knowing, not thinking, not imagining, but knowing that you've been there before. So let's consider the other possibility. What if in another timeline, another version of you lives in that place? What if the pull you feel isn't toward a location in your current reality, but toward a timeline where that location is your reality, where you wake up there every morning, where you know the streets, where you've built a life? In this model, consciousness being entangled across timelines means that place-specific experiences bleed through, not as clear memories, but as feelings, as pulls, as a sense of belonging that doesn't fit your current circumstances. You're drawn to Portland because a parallel version of you has lived there for years and loves it deeply. The resonance of their experience, their emotional connection to that place, filters into your awareness as an inexplicable pull. You feel called to the mountains because another version chose that life, found peace there, and the rightness of that choice echoes across timelines into your consciousness. The place isn't calling you. Your parallel self is calling you through the medium of location. The place is just the physical manifestation of a life they're living that you're not currently living, but that you're quantum entangled with. This would explain why sometimes when people finally go to these places, they don't just enjoy them. They feel like they've come home. Because in a very real sense, they have. Not to a physical location they've been before, but to a timeline where they belong in a way they don't quite belong in their current one. It's recognition not of the place, but of the version of yourself that lives there. There's another layer to this. Some people report that the pull toward a place comes with specific information. They know which neighborhood they'd live in. They know what their life would be like there. They can describe their routine, their apartment, the cafe they'd go to, even though they've never been there and have no factual basis for these details. And sometimes, when they actually go, these details are accurate. The neighborhood exists exactly as they pictured it. The cafe they imagined is real and located exactly where they thought it would be. The life they envisioned is possible, available, waiting almost. If this is just imagination, it's remarkably specific and often surprisingly accurate imagination. But if it's information bleeding through from a timeline where they already live that life, then of course it would be specific and accurate. They're not imagining, they're remembering across timelines. Now, there's also a more mystical explanation that doesn't require parallel timelines. Some spiritual traditions speak of soul homes, places where your soul has connections that transcend your current lifetime. Past life associations, karmic connections, energetic resonances that draw you to specific locations. Whether you believe in that framework or not, it points to the same experience, that sometimes the pull toward a place feels deeper than personal preference. It feels like recognition at a soul level. And maybe that's exactly what it is, whether we explain it through quantum entanglement, past lives, or simple but profound aesthetic and emotional resonance. What matters practically is this. These pulls are often accurate guides. People who follow them, who actually uproot their lives and move to the places calling them, often report that it was one of the best decisions they ever made. Not because the place was perfect or solved all their problems, but because it was right. Because being there aligned something in them. Because they finally felt like they were where they were supposed to be. And people who ignore these pulls, who rationalize them away because they don't make practical sense, often spend years wondering, what if? Feeling a low-grade sense of being in the wrong place, of having missed a turn somewhere. The pull doesn't guarantee anything. Moving to a place you're drawn to doesn't automatically create a perfect life. You bring yourself with you wherever you go, complete with all your challenges and patterns. But there's something about honoring the pull that serves evolution. That creates conditions for growth. That allows certain possibilities to unfold that couldn't unfold elsewhere. Maybe it's because the place actually is better suited to who you are. Maybe it's because making the move requires courage and commitment that develop important qualities. Maybe it's because in another timeline, you're already there and thriving, and aligning your current timeline with that one creates resonance that supports both versions. Or maybe it's simpler than all that. Maybe you're just drawn to places you'd be happy in, and your deep intuition knows things your logical mind hasn't figured out yet. Whatever the explanation, the experience is real. The pull is real. And it might be worth listening to. Not necessarily by immediately moving across the world, but by getting curious, by visiting if you can, by exploring what it is about that place that speaks to you, by asking what it might be offering that your current location doesn't, and by being open to the possibility that you might belong there more than you belong where you are. Because if parallel selves exist, if consciousness is entangled across timelines, then belonging isn't singular. You might belong in multiple places simultaneously, and the pull you feel isn't telling you that you're in the wrong place necessarily. It might just be reminding you that there are other right places too. Other timelines where you're already there, other versions of you living that life. And maybe, just maybe, you're meant to bring those timelines closer together, to align this version with that one, to make the choice here that was already made there. The place is calling, but really you're calling you. From another timeline, another life, another version of the same consciousness. Inviting yourself home to a place you've never been, but somehow have always known. #8, brain-based explanations. We've been exploring mysterious possibilities, quantum entanglement, parallel timelines, consciousness bleeding across realities. And all of that may be true or partially true or a useful metaphor for experiences that have other explanations. It's important, crucial even, to balance mystery with understanding. To honor what neuroscience and psychology can tell us about these experiences without dismissing the profound strangeness of consciousness itself. So let's take time here to ground ourselves in what we actually know about how the brain creates your experience of reality. Your brain is not a passive receiver of information. It's a prediction machine, constantly generating models of reality based on past experience and using incoming sensory data to update and refine those models. Most of what you experience as reality is actually prediction. Your brain is guessing what's out there based on patterns it's learned, and using the small amount of actual sensory information it receives to correct errors in the guess. This is why you can see objects in dim light even though your eyes aren't receiving enough visual information to truly resolve them. Your brain fills in the details based on what usually appears in similar situations. This is why you can understand speech in a noisy environment even though you're not actually hearing all the words. Your brain predicts what was said based on context and fills in the gaps. This predictive processing is incredibly sophisticated, operating at multiple levels simultaneously, mostly beneath consciousness. And it's usually accurate enough to navigate reality effectively. But sometimes the predictions go too far. The pattern-matching engine finds patterns that aren't there. The gap-filling creates false continuity. The model of reality diverges from actual reality in ways that create experiences we call illusions, hallucinations, or anomalous perceptions. Deja vu, from this perspective, is a glitch in the temporal tagging system. Your brain predicts what's about to happen based on pattern recognition and accidentally tags that prediction as a memory rather than a prediction. So you experience the present as familiar because your brain labeled it as past even though it's actually prediction about immediate future. The hyperreal dreams are your brain running simulations during sleep, using your memories and emotional patterns to create detailed scenarios that help process experiences and prepare for possible futures. They feel real because they're using the same neural machinery that creates waking reality. The only difference is they're not being constrained by actual sensory input. The sudden life direction shifts are your unconscious mind finally breaking through to consciousness with information it's been processing for a long time. Your conscious awareness is limited, slow, serial. But your unconscious is vast, fast, parallel. It's been tracking patterns, integrating information, recognizing trajectories long before your conscious mind catches up. When you suddenly know you need to change direction, it's not mysterious information from elsewhere. It's information from your own depths that has finally become loud enough to hear. The emotional waves with no clear cause are your body's emotional systems responding to subconscious processing, hormone fluctuations, stress accumulation, or subtle environmental cues that didn't register consciously. Emotion evolved to be fast, faster than thought, so it often arrives before you know why you're feeling it. The mirror phenomenon is dissociation, a known psychological experience where the integration between different aspects of self temporarily loosens. Your brain maintains your sense of continuous identity through complex integration across many systems. When that integration hiccups, you can experience yourself as unfamiliar even though intellectually you know who you're looking at. All of this is well documented. All of this is based on extensive research into how brains actually work. And all of it is valuable to understand because it prevents us from making unnecessarily exotic explanations for experiences that have perfectly adequate conventional ones. The brain is capable of producing profoundly strange experiences through entirely ordinary processes. We don't need to invoke quantum mechanics or parallel universes to explain most of what we experience, even the weird stuff. But here's the thing. Understanding the brain mechanisms doesn't actually diminish the mystery of consciousness itself. It just moves the mystery one level deeper. Yes, we can explain how the brain creates the sense of a unified self through integration across multiple processing systems. But we still can't explain why that integration produces subjective experience at all. Why there's something it feels like to be you. Why there's an inner light of awareness instead of just complex information processing happening in the dark. This is called the hard problem of consciousness, and neuroscience hasn't solved it. We can map every neural correlate of consciousness, trace every pathway, identify every system involved in creating awareness, and we're still not closer to understanding why any of that produces experience. Why is there an experiencer? This question remains genuinely mysterious, and it's the question that opens the door to all the more exotic possibilities we've been exploring. If consciousness is somehow fundamental rather than emergent, if it's a basic feature of reality like space and time rather than something brains create, then the relationship between brain and consciousness might be more complex than standard neuroscience assumes. The brain might be more like a radio than like the source of the broadcast. It doesn't create consciousness. It receives it, filters it, shapes it into specific forms and experiences. And if that's the model, then all the phenomena we've been discussing might be moments when the radio picks up signals from broadcasts it's not usually tuned to. Parallel timelines, other versions, quantum entanglement of awareness. We can't prove this, but we also can't disprove it, because the fundamental nature of consciousness remains unknown. What we can say is this: the brain explanations are correct as far as they go. Understanding predictive processing, pattern recognition, unconscious integration, and the mechanics of perception is important. It keeps us grounded. It prevents unnecessary mystification. But those explanations don't exhaust the mystery. They describe the how without touching the why. They map the mechanisms without explaining the experience. They tell us what the brain does without explaining what consciousness is. And in that gap between mechanism and experience, there's space for wonder. Space for possibility. Space for the recognition that we might be participating in something larger and stranger than our current scientific models can capture. The invitation isn't to choose between brain-based explanations and more mysterious ones. It's to hold both. To understand the mechanics while remaining open to the possibility that the mechanics are embedded in a larger context we don't yet understand. Your brain is creating your experience of reality through prediction, pattern matching, and integration. That's true. And consciousness might be entangled across timelines, with your brain as the instrument that focuses and filters that larger awareness into the specific experience of being you. That might also be true. Both can coexist. Understanding the instrument doesn't mean there's no music. Understanding the mechanism doesn't mean there's no meaning. The experiences we've been exploring, all of them, can be respected and investigated from both perspectives. They're worth understanding neurologically, and they're worth remaining curious about metaphysically. Because the most honest position is to admit that we don't fully know. We have models, we have theories, we have frameworks that explain some things very well. But consciousness itself, in its fundamental nature, remains beautifully, maddeningly mysterious. And the experiences that feel like contact with parallel selves might be telling us something important about that mystery. Not despite what we know about brains, but because what we know about brains isn't the whole story. The whole story is larger, stranger, more wonderful. And we're still at the very beginning of understanding it. #9. What if contact is subtle? We've been exploring dramatic signs, intense déjà vu, hyperreal dreams, sudden life shifts. But what if contact with parallel selves isn't usually dramatic at all? What if it's happening constantly, quietly, in ways so subtle you don't recognize them as contact? Think about the thoughts that arise in your mind. Most of them feel like they come from nowhere. You're going about your day, and suddenly there's an idea. A connection between concepts you hadn't linked before. A solution to a problem you weren't consciously working on. A creative vision fully formed. Where did it come from? The standard answer is your unconscious mind. The vast processing power beneath awareness, working on problems, making associations, generating possibilities while you focus on something else. And that's certainly part of it. Your brain is incredibly active beneath the threshold of consciousness. Most of your thinking happens outside awareness. But what if some of those thoughts aren't just from your unconscious? What if some of them are from elsewhere? Imagine this, you're stuck on a problem. You've been working on it for hours, maybe days, and you're getting nowhere. You can't see the solution. You're frustrated, tired, ready to give up. And then, while you're taking a shower or driving or doing something completely unrelated, the answer appears. Not as a gradual realization, but as a sudden, complete knowing. The solution is just there, obvious, clear, like someone handed it to you fully formed. We call this insight, or breakthrough, or the shower effect because it happens so often in showers. But what if it's more than that? What if, in a parallel timeline, another version of you has been working on the same problem or a similar one, and they found the solution? They had the insight. And because consciousness is entangled at a quantum level, their breakthrough becomes available to you. Not as a message, not as communication, but as information that's suddenly accessible because it exists in the larger field of consciousness you both participate in. You experience it as your own thought because, at the deepest level, it is. It's your consciousness, just arriving from a different timeline, a different version, a different expression of the same awareness. This would mean that creative breakthroughs aren't just individual achievements. They're collective achievements across all your parallel versions, with each version contributing to the pool of insight that all versions can access. Think about moments of intuition, those gut feelings that arise without reasoning. You just know something, and you can't explain how or why you know it. Sometimes intuition is pattern recognition. Your unconscious has noticed patterns your conscious mind missed, and it's alerting you through feeling rather than through logical analysis. But sometimes intuition might be information from a parallel self who has already experienced the situation you're facing. They made a choice. They lived the outcome. And the knowledge of that outcome is available to you as a feeling, a knowing, a sense of which direction to take. Not prophecy, not prediction, just information from a version that's already been there. This would be incredibly practical contact. Not dramatic or mystical, but useful. Helping you navigate decisions by giving you access to experiences you haven't personally lived in this timeline, but that exist in the larger field of your consciousness. Consider the ideas that change your life, the random thoughts that end up being pivotal, the suggestions that appear in your mind from nowhere, and when you follow them, open up entire new paths. Maybe I should email that person. What if I learned this skill? I should go to this event, even though I don't feel like it. Little thoughts easily dismissed. But when you follow them, they lead to connections, opportunities, relationships that reshape your trajectory. Coincidence, divine guidance. Just good pattern recognition. Or information from parallel versions who have already explored various paths and are feeding back through the subtle mechanism of quantum entangled consciousness, which directions lead somewhere worth going. You'll never know for certain in any individual case, but you can notice the pattern. You can start paying attention to which seemingly random thoughts, when followed, lead to meaningful outcomes. And you might find that there's intelligence in them, not your conscious intelligence, something deeper, something that knows things your surface awareness doesn't. Maybe that's your unconscious. Maybe it's your parallel selves. Maybe it's both. Maybe your unconscious is the interface through which information from parallel timelines enters your conscious awareness. The contact isn't flashy. It doesn't announce itself. It just appears as thoughts, feelings, intuitions, creative sparks, quiet enough that you can easily dismiss them, easy enough to attribute to ordinary mental processes, but persistent enough that if you pay attention, if you start experimenting with following them, you notice they're often surprisingly accurate, surprisingly helpful, surprisingly aligned with outcomes you wouldn't have predicted, but that turn out to be exactly what you needed. This is the practical application of all this theory. Not just wondering about parallel selves, but actually using the potential information they might be offering. Not by trying to deliberately contact them or demand answers. You can't force quantum entanglement. You can't control which information bleeds through. But you can create conditions that make the subtle contact more noticeable, more accessible, more integrated into your decision-making process. Meditation helps. Quieting the surface noise of mind creates space for subtler information to become perceptible. Not because meditation gives you special powers, but because it calms the constant chatter that drowns out quiet knowing. Creative practices help. When you're painting, writing, playing music, making anything, you're operating in a state that's more receptive to unconscious information. The filter between conscious and unconscious becomes more permeable. And if parallel timeline information comes through the unconscious, then creative states make you more receptive to it. Journaling helps. Writing down the random thoughts and intuitions that arise creates a record. Over time, you can look back and notice which ones were accurate, which led somewhere useful. You start to recognize the difference between mental noise and actual signal. And simply being curious helps. Not dismissing the weird thoughts, the random impulses, the inexplicable knowings. Instead of that's just a random thought, trying, let me see where this leads. Not every thought is wisdom from a parallel timeline. Most aren't, but some might be. And learning to distinguish signal from noise is a skill that develops with practice. The key is holding it lightly. Not becoming someone who attributes everything to parallel selves or who loses their grounding in practical reality, but staying open to the possibility that you have access to more information than just what you've directly experienced in this timeline. That your consciousness is larger than your personal history. That wisdom can arrive from sources you don't consciously understand. That the thoughts in your head might sometimes originate from versions of you who have different experiences, different knowledge, different perspectives. And that when you honor those thoughts, follow those intuitions, trust those inexplicable knowings, you're not being irrational or mystical. You're being quantum. You're acknowledging that consciousness might work in ways our current scientific models don't fully capture. Contact with parallel selves, if it happens, is probably mostly like this. Not visions and visitations, not dramatic revelations, just thoughts, ideas, feelings, gentle guidance that arrives so quietly you could easily miss it if you're not paying attention. But when you do pay attention, when you start noticing the pattern, when you begin trusting the subtle signals, your life becomes more aligned, more fluid, like you're being guided by a wisdom that knows your paths better than you consciously can. Because maybe it does. Maybe it's already walked them. Maybe every version of you is walking different paths simultaneously, learning different lessons, and sharing it all through the subtle, constant, easily missed contact that happens in the quiet spaces of consciousness. The thoughts that arise from nowhere. The intuitions that don't make logical sense. The creative breakthroughs that feel like gifts. Maybe they are. Just not from outside, from other versions of inside. From the larger you that exists across all your parallel expressions, working together in ways you're only beginning to understand. The contact is subtle, but it's there, waiting for you to notice. Waiting for you to listen. #sign 10, the most powerful sign. We've explored many signs, many experiences that might indicate contact with parallel versions of yourself. Intense déjà vu, hyperreal dreams, sudden life shifts, mysterious emotions, all of it. But there's one sign that's more powerful than any of those. One experience that, if you have it, suggests something profound about the nature of your consciousness and its relationship to multiple timelines. It's this: the feeling that your current life isn't the only version of you that exists. Not as an intellectual concept, not as a fascinating theory you read about or a philosophy you find interesting, but as a felt sense, a knowing that sits somewhere deep in your chest or your gut or your bones. A quiet certainty that never fully goes away, no matter how much you try to rationalize it or dismiss it. You look at your life, your job, your relationships, your daily routine, your choices, and part of you knows. This is one version, one possibility among many, and the other possibilities aren't just theoretical. They're real. They're happening. They're being lived by other versions of you in realities that are just as real as this one. This isn't dissatisfaction with your life necessarily, though it can include that. It's something different. It's a kind of multiplicity awareness, a sense that your consciousness is larger than the single story you're living. Have you felt this? Some people describe it as feeling like they're living the wrong life, but that's not quite it. It's more that they're aware they're living one life out of many, and that awareness won't be silenced. They can be happy, fulfilled, grateful for what they have, and still carry this background sense of multiplicity, of existing in many configurations simultaneously, even though they can only consciously experience one at a time. Others describe it as a feeling of incompleteness, like they're a part of something larger, and the edges where they should connect to the rest are always slightly raw, slightly aware of the separation. Still others describe it more neutrally, just as a knowing. The way you know your name, your history, your basic facts about yourself. They know with the same certainty that they exist in multiple versions across multiple timelines. It's not a belief they adopted. It's not something they convinced themselves of. It's direct knowing, prior to thought, prior to belief. If you have this, if you recognize what I'm describing, then all the other signs we've explored are probably familiar to you already. You've experienced déjà vu that felt too specific to dismiss. You've had dreams of other lives that felt more real than your waking one. You've felt pulled toward directions and places that don't make logical sense, but that you know, somehow, are right. And all of these experiences reinforce the fundamental knowing. They're evidence for something you already knew intuitively. They're your parallel selves making contact in ways that your conscious mind can sometimes perceive. But the knowing itself doesn't depend on the dramatic experiences. It's there regardless. Quiet, constant, undeniable. And it changes how you relate to your life. When you know, really know, that this version isn't the only you, several things shift. First, you hold your choices more lightly, not irresponsibly, not carelessly, but without the desperate weight of this one decision determines my entire existence. Because you know, somewhere, another version made the other choice. Both paths are being explored. Both possibilities are being lived. This doesn't make the choices meaningless. If anything, it makes them more interesting. You get to focus on this particular path with curiosity about where it leads, rather than with fear about what you're missing by not taking the other path, because you're not missing it. Another version is living it. Second, you become more comfortable with uncertainty. You don't need to know the outcome of every choice before you make it, because you understand that all outcomes are being experienced somewhere. This version of you gets to explore this outcome. That's the role you're playing in the larger consciousness that is all your versions together. Third, you often develop a sense of communication or collaboration with your parallel selves, even if it's subtle. You start paying attention to the intuitions, the impulses, the strange knowings. You recognize them as potential information from other versions, and you consider them in your decision-making. Not as commands or infallible guidance, but as data points, as perspectives from versions that have different vantage points, different experiences, different wisdom to share. And fourth, you often feel a deep sense of connection that isn't based on physical relationships. A knowing that you're never truly alone, because other versions of you are always out there, living their lives, facing their challenges, celebrating their victories. You're part of a constellation of selves, all connected, all supporting each other through the quantum entanglement of consciousness, whether any of you are consciously aware of it or not. This can be enormously comforting, especially in moments of loneliness or difficulty. The sense that your struggle isn't isolated, that other versions are struggling too, or have already overcome similar challenges, or are sending strength in ways you can't directly perceive but can sometimes feel. Some people worry that believing in parallel selves makes this life less important. If all possibilities are being lived somewhere, why does this version matter? But that's backwards. Each version matters precisely because each is exploring unique territory. Your specific combination of choices, circumstances, relationships, challenges, this exact configuration only exists in this timeline. No other version of you is living this precise life. That makes it important, precious, unrepeatable. You're not less significant because other versions exist. You're part of a significant larger whole, and your unique exploration contributes to that whole in ways no other version can. This knowing, this felt sense of multiplicity, can also be lonely sometimes, because it's hard to explain to others. How do you tell people, I know I exist in multiple timelines simultaneously, without sounding unhinged? You mostly can't, so you hold it privately. You live with this knowledge that feels absolutely true to you, but that you can't share casually. And that's okay. Not everything needs to be shared. Not everything needs to be validated by consensus reality. You know what you know, and that knowing guides you, supports you, informs how you navigate your life. Whether it's literally true in a quantum mechanical sense, or whether it's a useful psychological framework, or whether it's both, doesn't really matter. What matters is the lived experience of it. And if you have this knowing, this sense that you're one version among many, then you've already experienced the most powerful sign of all. Everything else is just confirmation. You are multiple. You exist across timelines. Your consciousness is entangled with other versions of yourself who made different choices, live different lives, carry different wisdom. And sometimes in quiet moments you can feel them. Not dramatically, not obviously, but there, present, connected. Your parallel selves reaching across the boundaries, we think separate one reality from another, sharing what they've learned, offering what they know, supporting you in ways too subtle to name but real enough to feel. This knowing changes everything, and nothing. You still have to live this life, make these choices, walk this path, but you do it with the awareness that you're part of something larger. That consciousness is vaster than one timeline can contain. That who you are exceeds the boundaries of this single version. And in that awareness, there's freedom and peace and a strange, beautiful comfort. You're never alone. You're never without guidance. You're never limited to just what you've personally experienced in this timeline. You're connected to all your other selves, across all possible timelines, through the mysterious quantum nature of consciousness itself. They're trying to reach you, in thoughts, in feelings, in strange knowings that arrive without explanation. And you're trying to reach them too, whether you know it or not, sharing your experience, your wisdom, your love across the boundaries that don't exist at the level of pure awareness. This is the most powerful sign, not an experience that happens to you once or occasionally, but a knowing that never leaves, a truth that sits quiet in your awareness, unchanging and undeniable. You are more than one. You have always been more than one. And on some level too deep for words, you've always known. So here we are, at the end of this exploration, but also perhaps at a beginning. Because once you start noticing the signs, once you allow yourself to consider that your parallel selves might be reaching out, you can't fully unsee it. The awareness remains. The possibility stays open. And your life becomes, in subtle ways, a conversation between this version and the others, between the consciousness you know as me and the larger consciousness that is all your versions together. You are deeply imaginative, creating frameworks that help you make sense of experiences that science hasn't yet fully explained. Or you are quantum entangled with parallel versions of yourself, receiving information, guidance, and support from timelines you can't directly perceive, but that are just as real as this one. Or you are both, and the boundary between imagination and quantum reality is more permeable than we currently understand. Whichever is true, the invitation is the same. Pay attention, notice, be curious. The signs are there if you're willing to see them. The contact is happening if you're willing to recognize it. And your life, this particular, unique, unrepeatable life, becomes richer when you hold space for the possibility that you're part of something larger. That you exist across timelines. That wisdom reaches you from versions who have walked paths you're considering. That you're never truly alone, even in your most isolated moments. Because somewhere another version of you is living, breathing, making choices, learning, growing. And they're connected to you, through consciousness, through quantum entanglement, through the mysterious nature of awareness itself. Your parallel self is reaching out, in the deja vu that stops you in your tracks, in the dreams that feel more real than waking, in the sudden shifts that change your direction, in the emotions that arrive without cause, in the face in the mirror that seems both familiar and strange, in the pull toward places you've never been, in the thoughts that arise from nowhere, in the quiet knowing that never goes away. They're reaching out, and maybe, just maybe, you're finally learning to reach back. Rest well, and remember you are more than you think you are.